I didn't think betrayal could look so ordinary. Sitting in my car, parked across from the hotel, I watched her, the woman I had loved for nearly a decade, walk hand in hand with another man. It wasn't just the act that gutted me. It was the ease, the laughter, the casual way her hand grazed his arm as they walked through the sliding glass doors. Alyssa didn't look back. Not once. The dashboard clock glowed 9:42 p.m. I should have driven away. I should have spared myself the torment of sitting there, waiting for a glimpse of confirmation I already had. Instead, I gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white, my heart pounding like it was trying to break free from my chest. 1,000 questions swirled in my mind, each one more painful than the last. When did this start? How long had she been lying to me? Was it something I did or didn't do? The memories came uninvited. Our first kiss under a canopy of stars, the way she laughed during our road trips, the late nights spent dreaming about our future together. How had those moments dissolved into this? Her walking away from me, hand in hand with a man whose name I didn't even know. I wanted to barge into the hotel, demand an explanation, scream at her for destroying everything we'd built. But what good would it do? The truth was staring me in the face, as clear as the neon vacancy sign that flickered just above the hotel entrance. Instead, I stayed in my car, drowning in the silence. I thought about the last few years, the subtle shifts, the unspoken tensions, the nights she came home smelling of perfume that wasn't hers. I had ignored it all, clinging to the belief that our love could withstand anything. That belief was my prison, and Alyssa was the one who locked the door behind her. A cold, hard truth settled over me. The life we'd built was a lie, a hollow shell that cracked and crumbled the moment she stepped into that hotel. As the minutes ticked by, I realized this wasn't just the end of my marriage. It was the beginning of something else. Something I hadn't yet named but could feel stirring in the ashes of my broken world. I started the car, the engine roaring to life, and for the first time in years, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Clarity. This wasn't a defeat. It was a reckoning. Tonight, as I drove away from that hotel, I wasn't just leaving behind Alyssa's betrayal. I was leaving behind the man I had been, the man who stayed silent, who endured, who fought to preserve something that wasn't worth saving. A part of me shattered in that car, but another part ignited. I didn't know where this road would lead me, but I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't going to let her betrayal define me. Not anymore. There was a time when Alyssa was the center of my world, the brightest star in the universe I thought we were building together. I can still picture the first time I saw her. It was the summer of 2014, at an art exhibit hosted by a mutual friend. The room was buzzing with chatter, but the moment she stepped in, the noise seemed to fade. Alyssa had this way of commanding attention without trying. Her laughter was infectious, and the way her eyes lit up when she spoke made it impossible to look away. She was vibrant, magnetic, and full of life. I remember standing near a particularly abstract painting, pretending to analyze it while stealing glances at her. She caught me, of course. Alyssa always noticed everything. "You're either a critic or someone who's really bad at hiding confusion," she said, smiling. Caught off guard, I laughed. "Maybe both. But you're going to have to help me figure out what this is supposed to mean." That conversation was the start of everything. We bonded over our mutual love of travel, a shared disdain for small talk, and dreams of a life that felt bigger than the ordinary. She told me about her aspirations in corporate communications, her desire to reshape the way people connected. I told her about my work as a business consultant and my hopes of building a legacy that mattered. We clicked, effortlessly. By the time we left the exhibit, it felt like we'd known each other for years. Over the next few months, we were inseparable. Movie nights, spontaneous road trips, long walks where we talked about everything under the sun. With Alyssa, every moment felt alive, like the world was brighter simply because she was in it. Within a year, we were married in an intimate ceremony on a cliffside overlooking the ocean. It was small, just family and a few close friends, but it felt like a fairy tale. Alyssa wore a simple lace gown, her hair pinned back with tiny pearls, and as she walked down the aisle, I couldn't believe how lucky I was. We promised each other forever that day. The early years of our marriage were everything I'd ever dreamed of. We traveled to places we'd always wanted to see: Santorini, Kyoto, the Amalfi Coast. There were quiet evenings in our cozy apartment where we'd cook together, dance in the kitchen, and talk about the family we'd someday have. She was my partner in every sense of the word. We supported each other through career highs and lows, celebrated our wins, and comforted each other in moments of doubt. I remember thinking that life couldn't get better than those first few years. Back then, I couldn't have imagined that the woman who made me feel invincible would one day become the reason I felt so small. Looking back now, I see the irony in it all. The very things that brought us together, her energy, her passion, her drive, were the things that eventually pulled us apart. But in those early days, none of that mattered. For a time, we were happy. Truly, blissfully happy. And that's what makes it so hard to reconcile with the reality of where we ended up. If I'd known then what I know now, would I have done anything differently? Would I have walked away before we got too deep, before the cracks began to form? I don't think so. Because even now, after everything, I can't deny that there was magic in the beginning. A magic I'll carry with me, even if it's tinged with the bitterness of how it all ended. It's strange how life changes, how something that once felt indestructible begins to crack under the weight of time and reality. By 2018, Alyssa and I were living in what seemed, from the outside, like a perfect life. But beneath the surface, everything was starting to fray. I remember the shift vividly. It wasn't sudden, nothing so dramatic. It was slow, almost imperceptible at first, like the way a river erodes stone over years. My career as a business consultant was thriving, but it came at a cost. I was on the road more often than I was home, flying between cities, living out of hotel rooms, and attending endless meetings. I convinced myself I was doing it for us, for the future we had planned. Meanwhile, Alyssa's career in corporate communications was taking off. She was managing bigger projects, leading teams, and climbing the corporate ladder with the kind of determination I had always admired. At first, I was proud of her. Watching her succeed was inspiring, and I tried to be as supportive as I could. But the more her work demanded of her, the more distant she became. Late nights at the office turned into frequent team dinners. Weekend getaways became solo weekends where she had to catch up on work. I told myself it was just a busy season, that things would settle down eventually. But deep down, I felt the gap between us growing wider. The little things that once connected us started to slip away. We used to share everything: our dreams, our fears, our silly inside jokes. Now our conversations felt perfunctory, like we were checking off a list of obligations. How was your day? Busy. Yours? Same. And that was it. Our intimacy, once effortless and electric, became rare and mechanical. I told myself it was the stress, the exhaustion of two people trying to juggle demanding careers. But it was more than that. Alyssa wasn't just tired. She was distant, emotionally closed off in a way I couldn't reach. I started noticing little things that didn't add up. She bought a new perfume, one I'd never seen before. She began dressing differently, sleeker, more polished. Her phone, which used to sit on the counter or the coffee table, was now always with her, its screen facing down. When I brought up my concerns, she brushed them off. "You're overthinking," she'd say, her tone dismissive. "It's just work." I wanted to believe her. God, I wanted to believe her. But the unease in my gut wouldn't go away. One night, I planned a special dinner to reconnect. A quiet evening at home with her favorite meal, candles, and music. I wanted to remind her of what we had, what we were fighting for. But an hour before she was supposed to be home, she called to cancel. "Something came up," she said, her voice clipped. "I'll be late." I sat at the dining table that night, staring at the empty chair across from me, the candles burning down to nothing. That was the moment I knew. I didn't have proof, not yet. But I didn't need it. The woman I married, the woman I had built my life around, was slipping away from me. I spent countless nights lying awake, trying to pinpoint where it all went wrong. Was it my fault? Had I prioritized my career over her? Or was this just the natural course of things? A love that couldn't withstand the pressures of the real world. The cracks were there, undeniable and deepening. But I wasn't ready to face what they meant. Not yet. I told myself I could fix it, that if I just tried harder, if I just held on tighter, we could make it through. I was wrong. Those cracks weren't just beneath the surface anymore. They were spreading, and soon they would shatter everything we had built. They say trust is the foundation of any relationship. But what happens when that trust begins to erode? Not with a single blow, but with a series of small, sharp cuts. By 2019, the unease I'd been suppressing had turned into something I couldn't ignore. It wasn't just the late nights or the sudden changes in Alyssa's habits. It was the feeling. That gut-deep, bone-deep certainty that something was wrong. Alyssa started wearing a new perfume. Not just any perfume. A bold, expensive scent I'd never smelled on her before. She laughed it off when I asked about it, saying it was a gift from a coworker. "It's nothing," she said, brushing past me as if my concern was just another task on her to-do list. Her phone habits changed, too. Alyssa had always been casual with her phone, leaving it on the kitchen counter or tossing it onto the couch. Now it was glued to her side, the screen always turned face down. Whenever it buzzed, she'd glance at it with a fleeting smile before quickly putting it away. At first, I told myself I was imagining things. After all, wasn't I the one who had been traveling so much, leaving her alone to navigate her own busy life? But every time I tried to push those doubts away, they came back stronger, gnawing at the edges of my mind. One evening, I decided to plan a surprise dinner. A way to reconnect, to remind Alyssa and myself of what we once had. I spent hours preparing her favorite dishes, lighting candles, and setting the table with the china we usually saved for special occasions. But just an hour before she was supposed to be home, Alyssa called. "Something came up," she said, her voice distracted. "I have to stay late. Don't wait up." I stared at the table, the candles flickering softly in the dim light. The food, once steaming, grew cold. I sat there for what felt like hours, my mind spinning. When Alyssa finally came home, she smelled of that same perfume, her hair slightly tousled. She kissed me on the cheek as if nothing was wrong, oblivious to the storm brewing inside me. That night, as she slept beside me, I couldn't close my eyes. My mind replayed every suspicious moment, every dismissal, every excuse. The cracks in our marriage were no longer just cracks. They were fissures, threatening to split us apart. The final blow came a week later. I was looking for my car keys in Alyssa's purse when I found it. A hotel key card. My heart stopped. I stared at the card, its logo taunting me, daring me to ask the questions I'd been too afraid to voice. When I confronted Alyssa, she laughed it off. "It's for work," she said, rolling her eyes. "We had a meeting there last week. Don't be ridiculous." Her tone was dismissive, her explanation flimsy. But what could I do? I had no proof, no concrete evidence to back up my growing suspicions. So I let it go. Or at least, I pretended to. Inside, I was unraveling. I started paying closer attention, watching for signs, connecting dots that Alyssa probably thought I'd never notice. I downloaded a GPS tracker app, telling myself it was to ease my mind. If there was nothing to hide, then I'd finally have peace. But deep down, I knew the truth. The woman lying beside me, the woman I'd vowed to spend my life with, was slipping away, and I was done pretending I didn't notice. This wasn't just a gut feeling anymore. This was war, and I was preparing for battle. The moment everything came crashing down began innocently enough. A Tuesday night like any other. Alyssa had said she had another work meeting, her voice calm and practiced, like she had rehearsed the excuse 100 times. "Don't wait up," she said over her shoulder as she grabbed her purse and headed for the door. But this time, I didn't stay home. I had spent days wrestling with my suspicions, torn between wanting to believe her and needing to know the truth. The GPS tracker app on her phone felt like an invasion of privacy, but I justified it as a last resort. If I was wrong, I'd apologize and let it go. But if I was right, her location pinged at a bar downtown, not far from her office. My stomach churned as I drove there, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly they ached. I parked across the street and watched from the shadows. It didn't take long to spot her. Alyssa was at the bar, her back to me, laughing in that carefree way I hadn't seen in years. Sitting beside her was a man I didn't recognize. He was tall, confident, and far too familiar with her. Damian Cole. The name slipped out of her mouth during one of our few conversations about work. "He's brilliant," she'd said once, her eyes lighting up in a way that now made my blood boil. I had thought nothing of it at the time. I watched as they leaned closer, his hand brushing hers as they laughed over something I couldn't hear. My heart pounded, a mix of rage, pain, and disbelief. I wanted to storm in, confront them, and demand an explanation. But I stayed frozen in place, my world unraveling before my eyes. Then they left. Together. I followed them, my car at a safe distance, as they drove to a luxury hotel on the other side of town. Every mile felt like a nail in the coffin of our marriage. When they arrived, I parked across the street and watched as Alyssa and Damian walked toward the entrance. Her hand grazed his arm, and he leaned in to whisper something that made her laugh. That laugh, it shattered me. They disappeared inside, leaving me alone in my car with the truth I'd been avoiding for months. Alyssa was cheating on me. The woman I had loved, trusted, and built my life with was betraying me in the most intimate way. Tears blurred my vision as I gripped the steering wheel, my mind racing. How long had this been going on? Was this the first time? The 10th? I sat there for hours, unable to move, unable to process the enormity of what I just witnessed. When I finally drove home, the house felt different. Cold, empty, and hollow. Every corner was a reminder of the life we had built together, a life that now felt like a lie. I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't. Instead, I replayed the scene over and over, my mind tormenting me with images of Alyssa and Damian. By morning, one thing was clear. I couldn't confront her. Not yet. I needed a plan, a way to protect myself from the fallout of her betrayal. Alyssa had broken something inside me, something that could never be repaired. But she hadn't destroyed me. Not yet. As I sat in the dim light of dawn, I vowed that I would take control of my life again. I wouldn't let her lies define me. This wasn't just a revelation. It was a turning point. The life we had was over. Now it was time to figure out what came next. Confronting Alyssa immediately would have been too easy, too predictable. A screaming match, accusations flying, and tears would have given her the satisfaction of control. No, I couldn't do that. Not yet. The revelation of her betrayal left a deep scar, but it also gave me clarity. I needed to protect myself first, emotionally, mentally, and financially. This wasn't just about a marriage crumbling. It was about survival. In the days following the hotel incident, I became a master of pretense. I went through the motions of daily life, smiling at the right moments, nodding during her half-hearted conversations, and pretending I didn't notice the faint traces of her perfume when she came home late. Inside, I was withdrawing, piece by piece, as I planned my next move. Alyssa didn't notice. Or maybe she didn't care. She seemed relieved even, as if my silence was proof that I hadn't uncovered her secret. She carried on with her charade, oblivious to the storm brewing beneath the surface. I started with small steps, creating a separate bank account, transferring funds in increments so it wouldn't raise suspicion. Every penny was a lifeline, a step closer to freedom. I sorted through our important documents, making copies of everything I'd need when the time came to leave. It was during one of these quiet nights, sitting in the den surrounded by papers, that I reached out to Ryan Porter. Ryan was an old friend, a rugged outdoorsman who owned a secluded mountain lodge. We hadn't spoken in years, but I trusted him. "Ryan," I said, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside me. "I need a favor." He didn't ask too many questions. Ryan had a way of understanding without prying, a rare gift in people. He offered me the use of a cabin, a small rustic space nestled in the woods, far from prying eyes and judgmental whispers. "It's yours for as long as you need it," he said. "No strings attached." That cabin became my sanctuary even before I set foot in it. I began secretly moving belongings there, a few clothes, personal items, and things that mattered most to me. Each trip felt like a step closer to freedom, a quiet rebellion against the life Alyssa thought I was still clinging to. At home, I continued the act. I didn't question her late nights or her growing distance. When she canceled plans or brushed me off, I simply nodded, letting her believe I was too distracted to care. But inside, I was building walls. Every time she smiled at me with those hollow eyes, every time she kissed me with a perfunctory peck, another brick went up. The hardest part was pretending to sleep at night, lying beside her while my mind raced with plans and possibilities. Some nights, I'd stare at the ceiling for hours, wondering how we had ended up here. Other nights, I'd slip out of bed and sit in the living room, staring out the window into the darkness. That darkness became a strange comfort. It mirrored the emptiness I felt inside, the void Alyssa had carved into my life. But it also reminded me of the light I was chasing, the hope of a life without lies, without betrayal. By the time I moved the last of my belongings to the cabin, I felt ready. Not whole, not healed, but ready. Leaving wouldn't be easy. It would hurt like hell, tearing away from a life I had fought so hard to build. But staying would hurt more. This silent withdrawal wasn't just about leaving Alyssa. It was about reclaiming myself. And I wasn't going to let her take that away from me. The confrontation was inevitable. I had rehearsed it 1,000 times in my mind, each version sharper than the last. Yet when the moment finally came, it was nothing like I had imagined. It was a Saturday morning, the kind Alyssa used to love. Lazy and slow, with coffee brewing and sunlight streaming through the kitchen windows. I chose that day because I knew she wouldn't expect it. She was scrolling through her phone at the kitchen table, wearing the same detached expression I'd grown accustomed to. For a brief moment, I hesitated, a part of me clinging to the hope that maybe I was wrong. Maybe there was a reasonable explanation for everything, and I was about to destroy what little remained of our marriage over a misunderstanding. But then I saw her smirk at a message on her phone, and any doubts I had evaporated. "Alyssa," I said, my voice calm but firm. "Are you having an affair?" The words hung in the air, heavy and undeniable. She looked up at me, startled, her fingers pausing mid-scroll. For a moment, her expression flickered. Guilt, panic, something I couldn't quite place. But then it was gone, replaced by a practiced indignation. "Are you serious, Ethan?" she said, rolling her eyes. "What kind of question is that?" "I'm asking because I need the truth," I replied, keeping my tone steady despite the storm raging inside me. "Are you seeing someone else?" She scoffed, setting her phone down with a theatrical sigh. "This is ridiculous. Where is this even coming from?" I could feel my patience wearing thin, but I refused to let her see me break. Don't lie to me, Alyssa. I know about the hotel. I know about Damien. Her face paled for a fraction of a second before she recovered, her defenses snapping into place. You've been spying on me? She snapped. That's what this is about. You're invading my privacy and then accusing me of, what, cheating? Is that what you think of me? The audacity of her gaslighting nearly knocked the wind out of me. She wasn't just denying it. She was trying to turn it around, to make me feel like the villain in this story. You don't get to make this about me, I said, my voice sharper now. I saw you, Alyssa. I saw you with him, so stop pretending and just tell me the truth. Her eyes narrowed, and for a moment, I thought she might finally confess. But instead, she crossed her arms and said, You've been gone all the time, Ethan. Always traveling, always working. Do you have any idea how lonely I've been? If something's wrong in our marriage, maybe you should take a look at yourself. Her words were like a slap in the face, but I refused to let her see how much they hurt. Is that your excuse? I asked, my voice cold. Blaming me for your choices? She didn't answer, just stared at me with a mixture of defiance and something that looked like shame. I realized then that I wasn't going to get the closure I wanted. She wasn't going to admit to anything, and even if she did, it wouldn't change what had already happened. This wasn't about saving our marriage anymore. It was about saving myself. Without another word, I turned and walked out of the room, leaving her sitting at the table. In the weeks that followed, I focused on securing my finances and finalizing my plans to leave. Alyssa seemed to think my withdrawal was a temporary phase, something I'd snap out of eventually. But she was wrong. I wasn't withdrawing to escape. I was preparing to move on, and this time, I wouldn't look back. The day I left was like any other, at least for Alyssa. She was away at another work retreat, oblivious to the quiet unraveling of the life we'd built together. For me, it wasn't just a day. It was the culmination of months of planning, of holding my emotions in check, of silently piecing myself back together while everything around me fell apart. The house was eerily quiet as I moved through it, gathering the last of my belongings. I had packed most of my essentials already, slowly moving them to Ryan's mountain cabin over the past few weeks. Now it was just the finishing touches. Photo albums I couldn't bear to leave behind, books that had been my companions on lonely nights, and the wedding ring that no longer felt like it belonged to me. I picked up the ring from the dresser, its weight surprisingly heavy in my palm. For years, it had symbolized everything I believed in: commitment, love, forever. Now, it felt like a relic of a life I no longer recognized. Placing the ring on the nightstand, I scribbled a note on a piece of paper. My hand trembled as I wrote the words, each one a goodbye to the life I thought we were building together. I hope it was worth it. That was all I wrote. Anything more would have been wasted breath, words she wouldn't understand or care to hear. Walking through the house one last time, I let the memories wash over me. The living room where we had spent countless evenings curled up together, laughing and dreaming. The kitchen where we used to dance while dinner simmered on the stove. The bedroom that had once been a sanctuary but now felt like a tomb. I paused at the front door, my heart heavy with a mix of grief and relief. Leaving wasn't easy. It never is. But staying would have destroyed me. The drive to the mountain cabin felt surreal, like I was moving through a dream. The farther I got from the city, the lighter I felt. The towering buildings gave way to rolling hills, and the air grew crisper, cleaner. By the time I reached the cabin, a strange sense of peace had settled over me. Ryan was waiting when I arrived, his rugged frame leaning against the porch railing. He didn't say much, just a firm clap on my shoulder and a nod of understanding. The cabin was small but cozy, its walls lined with bookshelves and its windows offering a view of the surrounding forest. It was the kind of place where time seemed to stand still, where the chaos of the world couldn't reach you. For the first time in months, I allowed myself to breathe. The next few days were a blur of unpacking and adjusting to the quiet. There were no buzzing phones, no hurried conversations, no lingering tension in the air. Just the sound of birds chirping, leaves rustling in the breeze, and the occasional crackle of the fireplace. At night, I sat on the porch, staring at the stars and reflecting on everything that had led me here. The pain was still there, sharp and unrelenting, but so was the hope. The hope of a life unburdened by lies and betrayal. I wasn't sure what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, I felt free. Leaving Alyssa wasn't just about walking away from her. It was about walking toward something better. A life where I could rediscover who I was, where I could heal, where I could finally be at peace. As I stood on the cabin porch, the cool mountain air brushing against my face, I knew I had made the right choice. This was my new beginning. And no matter how difficult the road ahead might be, I was ready to face it. Alone, but stronger than ever. The first few weeks at the cabin were both a relief and a challenge. The silence was a blessing. No ringing phones, no tension hanging in the air, no pretending everything was fine. But it was also a stark reminder of what I had lost. Even though Alyssa's betrayal had broken me, there were still moments when I missed the life we had before it all went wrong. The cabin, tucked away in the heart of the mountains, became my sanctuary. The mornings were crisp and quiet, the afternoons filled with the sound of birdsong and the rustling of leaves, and the evenings wrapped in a blanket of stars. It was beautiful, but it also forced me to confront myself in ways I hadn't anticipated. One day, while hiking a nearby trail, I met Sierra Bennett. She was crouched on a rock, camera in hand, capturing a hawk mid-flight. Her energy was infectious, vibrant, yet grounded in a way that drew people in without effort. "Quite the view, isn't it?" she said, glancing over her shoulder with a warm smile. I nodded, unsure of how to respond. It had been a while since I'd had a genuine conversation with anyone. We ended up walking the trail together, talking about everything from her work as a wildlife photographer to my decision to move to the cabin. There was no judgment in her eyes, no pity, just understanding. Over the next few weeks, Sierra and I crossed paths often. Sometimes it was on the trail, other times it was at the small general store in town. Slowly, our encounters turned into intentional meetings. Coffee at her place, long conversations by the lake, and even a few photography lessons. Sierra had a way of seeing the world that was both refreshing and humbling. Through her lens, even the simplest things, a leaf, a ripple in the water, the way the light filtered through the trees, felt extraordinary. She encouraged me to pick up a camera and try it myself, and for the first time in years, I felt a spark of creativity reignite within me. With her encouragement, I started exploring passions I had long forgotten. Hiking, writing, even photography. The days no longer felt like something to endure. They became something to look forward to. Ryan, too, became a steady presence in my life. He'd stop by the cabin with a bottle of whiskey or a bag of groceries, always ready to share a story or lend an ear. His community, people who had chosen this quiet, rugged way of life, welcomed me without hesitation. For the first time in years, I felt a sense of belonging. It wasn't just about healing from the pain of Alyssa's betrayal. It was about rediscovering who I was outside of our marriage. I began to understand that the life I thought I'd lost wasn't the only life I could have. Sierra never pushed for anything more than friendship, and I appreciated that. She gave me the space to process, to grieve, and to rebuild at my own pace. And though I wasn't ready to open my heart fully, her presence reminded me that there was still good in the world, still people worth trusting. One evening, as we sat by the fire pit outside the cabin, Sierra handed me a book of poetry. "For those nights when you need a reminder that life is still beautiful," she said. I thanked her, unsure if I'd ever open it. But later that night, I flipped through its pages, and one line stayed with me. And when the storm is over, you won't remember how you made it through. But one day, you'll find yourself standing in the sunlight, stronger than ever. For the first time since leaving Alyssa, I believed those words might be true. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew one thing for sure. I was finally on a path that felt right, a path that was mine, and mine alone. It had been a year since I walked away from Alyssa and the life we shared. A year filled with rebuilding, healing, and rediscovering who I was outside of our broken marriage. The cabin in the mountains had become my refuge, a place where the chaos of my old life couldn't touch me. Then, one afternoon, she found me. I was sitting on the porch, sipping coffee and listening to the wind rustle through the trees, when her car pulled up the long gravel driveway. My stomach tightened at the sight of her stepping out, looking both hesitant and determined. "Alyssa," I said, setting my cup down as she approached. "Ethan." Her voice was soft, almost pleading. She stood at the edge of the porch, her eyes scanning the cabin, the woods, and finally landing on me. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The silence between us was heavy, filled with all the things we hadn't said. "Can we talk?" she asked, her voice trembling. I nodded, gesturing for her to sit on the bench across from me. She looked different. Tired, thinner, her once polished appearance now slightly frayed. "I owe you an apology," she began, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "For everything. For the lies, the betrayal, all of it." I didn't respond immediately, letting her words hang in the air. She continued, her voice cracking as she confessed the truth about her affair with Damien. "It was a mistake," she said, tears streaming down her face. "I thought I wanted something different, something more. But it wasn't worth it. He wasn't worth it." I studied her, the woman I had once loved with every fiber of my being. Her regret was genuine, her pain palpable, but it didn't change what had happened. "I know I hurt you," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "And I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I had to see you. I had to tell you how sorry I am." I took a deep breath, my emotions swirling, anger, sadness, and surprisingly, a trace of pity. "Alyssa," I said finally, my voice steady, "I appreciate your apology, but it doesn't change the past. What you did, it broke me. It broke us." She nodded, tears falling freely now. "I know," she said. I don't know how to fix it." "You can't," I replied, the words heavier than I expected. "Some things can't be undone." For a moment, she looked like she might argue, but then she nodded, accepting the truth she had likely known all along. "I hope you're happy," she said after a long silence. "I'm getting there," I replied honestly. Alyssa stood, hesitating for a moment as if she wanted to say more, but she didn't. She turned and walked back to her car, her footsteps heavy with the weight of everything left unsaid. As I watched her drive away, I felt an unexpected sense of peace. Her visit, though painful, was the closure I hadn't realized I needed. That evening, I climbed to the top of a nearby ridge, a place I often went when I needed to think. The sun was setting, painting the sky in hues of orange and gold, and the mountains stretched out before me in quiet majesty. I thought about the man I had been, the husband who gave everything, the man who was shattered by betrayal, and the person I had become over the past year. I had found a new life, a new purpose, and most importantly, a new sense of self. Forgiveness wasn't about letting Alyssa back into my life. It was about letting go of the pain she had caused me. As the first stars began to appear in the darkening sky, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. This was my closure. And as I stood there, the cool mountain breeze brushing against my face, I realized that I had finally found what I had been searching for all along. peace.